I appreciate being here. Thank you for the invitation. Yes, I am in Colorado right now, so it just turned 8 o'clock in the morning. So I always joked when I was actually an engineer before I went into theology, and all my classes were at 8 a.m. And I was convinced that my GPA would have increased substantially if the classes were at 1 o'clock instead of 8 o'clock. So uh, mornings are not always my best, but I appreciate being here. One of the things about speaking last is most of the really good things have already been said. I've been looking at my notes and I've kind of been checking off, going, well, I don't need to say that now. I don't need to say that now. I have been the beneficiary of a number of really thoughtful people, especially of Africans in my life. And the latest I've worked with was Lamin Sani. So I give a lot of credit to these mentors and helping me maybe as an outsider kind of see the situation in Africa through African eyes. I was going to say that, everything that, I say correctly or appropriately about this situation, I learned from someone else like Lamin Zana. And then anything that I say that's incorrect, I was going to blame it on Kobena. But he's already spoke, so we know that can't be true. He's very thoughtful and insightful. So I wish I would have spoke before him, and then I could have got away with it, but I can't. So kind of my first kind of entrance into early to African Christianity was early African Christianity. I worked for a number of years on a series called the Ancient Christian Commentary on Scripture, and that was a 29-volume commentary on Scripture based on early church from 2nd century to the 7th century. And what we found that while we were doing this, that a large percentage of the texts that we were combing for this particular series were influenced or written by Africans. And I'm done finding African broadly. I'm talking about Roman North Africa, the Latin-speaking Africa, but also the Egyptian, the school of Alexandria. And so many of the leading themes of the widely read homilies of people like John Chrysostom, Theodoret, Ambrose, followed Origen, Didymus, and Cyril in specific details. During the 14 years of our investigation of these particular texts that are required to edit the commentary, this was one of our most unexpected discoveries. And we came, after thinking this and wrestling with this for over 20 years, Tom Oden, my mentor, came up with this thesis that simply stated that Christianity has a much longer history than its Western European expression. Africa has played a decisive role in the formation of Christian culture from its infancy, a role that has never been adequately acknowledged or studied, either in the global South or the global North. And so when we started thinking about this, we really had to rethink how the story was told. So it's very important to understand in the early church, probably for the first 5 centuries, that there was a south to north influence, that the church of the south was teaching the church of the north how to think Christianly, how to read the Bible, how to think in a way and live in such a way that modeled this new reality of the lordship of Jesus Christ. So kind of this has already been kind of stated, but from the outset, Christianity was a non-Western, non-European religion. And I think this has been documented by others too. And so, but over the centuries, by the time we get to the 16th, 17th century, in many ways, this kind of Christianity becomes a geographic expression. The Latin-speaking Christianity of the West becomes the Christianity of the history books. This manifestation of Christianity that emerged was a geographic expression. So to be Christian was to be European, and likewise to be European was to be Christian. The Christianity that developed out of this Protestant Europe was powerfully shaped by the Enlightenment and reconfigured according to a new worldview. It was the secularized Christianity that the modern missionary movement carried with them to Africa and to the world. So during this period, what Andrew Walls called the Great Migration. So we have this Reformation period, we have the kind of the most European expression of Christianity, then was followed by this Great Migration of Europeans leaving the continent and going around the world, but bringing their religion with them. So I bring this up because I think it's very important to realize that Christianity has a longer story than just Protestant Europe expressions. And I think we're beginning to understand that. And the movement that we're experiencing now, that is not something new. That was happening from the very beginnings of Christianity. What was new was that it was located in one specific area in Europe. That was one of the changes that occurred. And then even that wasn't exactly true, because we know the Coptic church existed. We know the Ethiopian church existed. And so those are really a part of it. So that's how I entered into it, and then I began exploring Christianity. And then I began to work with Laman Sani. And one of the things that we wanted to work there was to develop an African Christian understanding of the public role of religion in Africa. Laman wrote this: modern Africa has been the bearer of two massive and uneven influences, one secular and the other religious. The secular influence is entrenched in the autonomy of the sovereign nation state, and the religious in the steady expansion of Christianity and Islam on the continent. In the handover from colonial powers, Africans did not have the opportunity for critical reflection on the African understanding of the relations of politics and religion. Consequently, a Western understanding of the secular state was adopted, at least by African elites. So there's this kind of massive kind of influence kind of going, in different ways, and we can see that on the continent. And so we wanted to engage in different discussions and different engagements with what's the proper relationship of Christianity and the citizenship. The church as a voluntary society functioning in a civil society. This idea of a non-territorial expression of Christianity absent the Western removal of religion from the political economy. So there's a sense that in the 17th century, Locke, I don't want to go too much of it, but there's a sense of the religious freedom, but it also kind of removed Christianity and religion from the public sphere. So how do we kind of rethink it in Africa, where there is a sense of religious freedom, that the states are not identified as Christian or Muslim or some other religion, but at the same time, religion still plays an important role in the civil society, in the shaping of the consciousness of the society. We wanted to challenge Western views that reduce religion to a matter of personal belief, freedom of speech, and making no truth claims. And also, how do we develop an idea of the religious understanding of freedom? So theologically, one of the really important ideas of the early church was this idea of the image of God, that we're created as male and female in the image of God after the likeness. So the sense that what does it mean to be the image of God? What do we mean when we said that? And that we're all created that way. So in some ways, we're all equal in the sight of God. Well, if you look at the early church and kind of some of the developments around this topic, you begin to understand that the image of God is our capability to respond to God. So this idea that because we're capable to respond to God, then we become responsible. Not only are we responsible to God, but we're also responsible to our neighbors. So there's two great commandments of the church: love God, love your neighbor. So I think there's something really important about that as we start to think about not only religious freedom, but also the public role of Christianity in Africa, is this idea of what is our responsibility? Because we're capable of responding to God, what does that behold us to do? This idea of a dual citizenship, that we're citizens of heaven, but we're also the citizens of our culture, our family, our city, our state, our nation, as it expands. So I think that's one of the things that, as we really grapple with, is what is my responsibility, but what is my responsibility in my community? So in Western Christianity, we've read this a very individualistic individualistic call. But I don't think it has to be understood purely as individualism, because we are who we are because of who we're with. So kind of the last thing I would say was this idea that the early church, especially in the martyr traditions, is this idea of who do we owe allegiance to? And in the ancient Roman world, before the 4th century, before Constantine, it wasn't possible to be a good Christian and a good Roman, that allegiance was divided. And the Christians made the argument, because of our allegiance to God, that single allegiance, we can actually become good citizens, and we actually are good citizens. And I think in some ways why those martyr stories are so powerful is because the singularity of that will. But as Christians and as human beings, there's a mixed allegiance within our hearts. There's mixed motives. We do things for different reasons. We many times do not trust God with our whole being. And so I think a really important aspect of this that we say, especially coming out of the desert traditions of Egypt and even in Ethiopia, is this idea of spiritual formation, of ideas of solitude and silence and different spiritual disciplines that actually help shape that alliance or that allegiance in our hearts to a single focus, which then can make us good, even better citizens and better fellow human beings because of that allegiance. So I've been thinking a lot about on that subject right now, especially as we look in Africa, because I see when I interact with young Christians in Africa, but also in the West, is there's a sense that the gospel that the church brings to the service every week is not big enough. It's not something that claims our allegiance. It's not something that shapes our vision for the future and gives us hope. And so I think there's always this kind of negotiation that's going on, this translation into our cultures. And I think especially in Africa, I think we're at this point where I see, at least in public culture, that the young people are just not sure if Christianity can answer the questions that are being asked in Africa. Thank you.